Wolverines picking up far and away their most impressive victory of the season. Led virtually start to finish, shot 52% in the game against Purdue. Backcourt was great. Devontae Jones, Eli Brooks. They had 12 threes, 57% behind the arc. Hunter Dickinson continued his fabulous play, had 22, hit 4 threes. It ended in a court storming, and why not? 82-58. Second largest margin ever for Michigan over a top 5 team. And I think the thing that stood out to me, Trey, was that nothing stood out, that it was a thorough domination in every aspect of the game. It wasn't like, well, they just did this one thing well. They did everything well. They were great offensively. They didn't turn the ball over. They were incredible on defense against the most efficient offense in the country. This was just a thorough beatdown in every aspect of the game.
Yeah, I thought the difference, though, was Devontae Jones. The way that he pushed the pace early on in this game really just set the tone for Michigan's offense overall. I love the way that he gets the ball out in transition, gets the ball to his playmakers, played with a ton of pace, because with this Michigan team, they don't have a lot of guys in the half court that can break you down, you know, make plays on the offensive end. It's not like you have Jaden Ivey where you can just give him the ball and give him space. So they have to be able to get out in transition, work together, move the basketball. And I thought that all started with Devontae Jones.
What do you think was different with Devontae Jones? I mean, it's been kind of up and down this year, and I feel like we've spoken about him a lot on this show. And every once in a while, he has a game like this where you say kind of this is what they were expecting. This is what we saw at Coastal Carolina last year. And then he'll have games where you say, it's tough to make that transition going from mid-major to the Big Ten. What was different here?
Well, I think over the last few weeks that Juwan Howard has put the ball in his hands a lot more. I thought earlier in the year he swung the ball a lot. You know, he was just kind of initiating the offense, wasn't nearly as much involved as he is now. They're putting the ball in his hands, open ball screens, getting him off DHOs, a lot of different actions to let him be a playmaker and show what he can do on the offensive end.
What about the defense? I mean, to just completely shut down this Purdue team, right? I mean, you got a team averaging in the mid-80s coming in. Look at the numbers here. I mean, they're averaging 85 points per game. They scored 58. They're the most efficient offense in the country. You hold them under a point per possession. They shot it brutally. We don't show the turnovers here, but they were bad, and that's been a problem for Purdue all year. I mean, it was just one thing after another. Really nothing worked for them offensively. How did Michigan slow this juggernaut down?
Well, I think they did 2 things. I think the first thing they did was they built a wall in transition. Jaden Ivey is one of the best open court players in all of college basketball. And every time Purdue got a rebound or they tried to push the ball, Michigan built a wall, didn't allow Jaden Ivey to get downhill. Because if you let Jaden Ivey get downhill, he can create his own shot. He can find the bigs. He can find Sasha Stefanovic for 3. So I think that was the first thing they did. And then the other thing they did was they mixed up defenses, which I thought was huge. And I think teams are going to start to do that a lot more on Purdue. They played a little bit of zone. They played a little bit of man. They pressed a little bit. And it just throws the rhythm of the game off if you're Purdue offensively. So I think that was really effective as well, just because they're so efficient offensively. If you let them get in a rhythm, Purdue, and you let them get the ball inside, get Jaden Ivey in space, get Sasha Stefanovic coming off of 3s, they're so hard to stop. So I think you have to kind of try to mess up the rhythm of the game a little bit.
Yeah, that was really noticeable, particularly the zone. I mean, it just kind of felt like it got Purdue off balance. What's the what kind of how surprised were you, I guess, is maybe the best way of phrasing it, that Purdue wasn't able to adjust? Was it just that Michigan was a step ahead, or was something off with Purdue?
I wasn't surprised actually at all. I think you think about Michigan, right? This is like their Super Bowl, right? Because you need a big-time win to build that tournament resume. Purdue's coming off a game against Illinois where they're trying to prove that they're the best team. You have a quick turnaround, 2 days, and especially when you have bigs, right? When you have 2 big men, they need rest. They need time to recover. So it wasn't really surprising for me at all.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is this is how the NCAA tournament works,
That's
too,
true.
right? I mean,
you don't get rest in the tournament.
No. I mean, you play 2 games in 3 days.
Right.
Like that's kind of the way it works. And Michigan was in the same boat. In fairness, right? They had to go all the way out to Penn State and played a really tight game and managed to get through it. I mean, just the historic nature of this game was incredible to me. This was the 2nd largest margin of victory ever for an unranked Big Ten team against a top 5 conference foe. The other one, interestingly enough, was also Michigan over Purdue. It happened in 1987. So it kind of came out of nowhere in some ways for Michigan. What does this do for them here going forward? Because the thing that we have talked about with them is there's just not a whole lot on their resume What does this do in terms of giving them a shot in the arm, particularly given how many opportunities they have here down the stretch, because they have a very challenging schedule?
Yeah, I think it just gives you confidence. Like, I'm not a bracketologist. I'm not a guy that, can break down all the numbers. I'm not Joe Leonardi. But one thing I do know is that now there's a confidence, there's a belief that we can win, that we can play well on the offensive end, that we can defend. There was a point in the season where they were giving up 40 points per game to opposing backcourts. Now that's not the case. They're really shutting down people on the defensive end. They're not being they're being more decisive on the defensive end, getting into people utilizing their youth and athleticism. So I think it just gives them confidence on both ends of the floor.
So look at the schedule here. So there are 8 games left on this schedule. 7 of these games are quad 1 games. The only one that is not a quad 1 game would be home against Rutgers. Every single one of those games otherwise is a quad 1. And so, again, it was the first game for Michigan in kind of this decisive stretch. And we're going to talk to Mike DeCourcy about the bracketology coming up here in just a bit and get a sense of where Michigan stands. He has a new bracket out today. But as you talk about how this Michigan team has kind of started to turn a corner a little bit, I don't want to leave them without talking about Hunter Dickinson because, man, he has been incredible. And, like, you go back to their COVID pause, and since then, he's just been a different guy. And part of it has been his ability to stretch defenses now. I mean, he had 4 more threes in yesterday's game. It just feels like he has become so much harder to defend. What's going on there? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think you just said, just getting him out in space, getting him in short roll situations and pick and pop situations. So short roll is where you're not picking and popping necessarily, but you're getting the ball in the mid-range area. So where the guard comes off the ball screen, you give them the ball in the mid-range area. So the big has to stop the guard and then close out to Hunter Dickinson so he can shoot or drive. So I think that's been really impressive. And then also just him expanding his game, right? He realizes that he needs to be more of a dual threat on the offensive end, being able to knock down threes, drive closeouts, and still obviously he's a great player in the post. So you got to give him a lot of credit because I think he has expanded his game in the course of the season, which is not easy to do. That's something you normally do in the offseason.
He's really been tremendous. What do you make of this performance by Purdue? It's funny, we sat here yesterday, and I think Raphael said he didn't think they were going to lose again. And they turn around and lose the very next game after falling to Illinois. And I agree with you. Like, I think they expended a lot of emotional energy probably in that Illinois game, and it's just hard. It's hard to get up for every game. But I would also think, to me, again, from where I sit, and I defer to you, but I feel like this highlighted the biggest issue for them that we have seen all year, which this is an average at best defensive team. I mean, they're 11th in the Big Ten in defensive efficiency in conference play. What stands out as you watch them on that end? Because they had no answer for Michigan yesterday.
I'm going to get a little controversial here.
All right.
And so what I'm going to say is, like, Purdue has inter-squad competition. And that can kind of mess with your mind a little bit. You think about it, they have 2 starters at every position. So Sasha Stefanovic is not playing well, Ethan Morton's going to come in. If Travion Williams is not playing well, Zach Edey's going to come in. If Caleb Furst is starting to play well, Mason Gillis won't get time. And I think that's something to watch because I think that at a certain point, you can only sacrifice so much, right? You think about Travion Williams, first team all Big Ten, now all of a sudden coming off the bench some games. I just think, I'm a player that, loves the individual play. I'm not a selfish guy, but I love the individual play. So I just wonder sometimes, are players being asked to give up too much? I'm going to be a little controversial in that regard.
All right. That's a double-edged sword, right? I mean, on one hand, like, when they're rolling,
right.
I mean, they can just throw so many bodies at you. And when they're not rolling, they have the possibility of saying, okay, this is, hey, it's not working with Zach. Let's go to Travion. It's the most obvious example. But
and then as a player, it's like if you know, like, I can only miss like 1 or 2 shots or I'm coming out, that gets you frustrated. You're human. And I think you see it sometimes with Travion Williams. He gets a little bit frustrated. He misses a couple shots. Zach Edey comes in. He has to go to the bench. So I'm just saying it's something to watch. I don't know necessarily if it's going to be an issue long term.
Nice problem to have, though.
I don't think
there are a lot of coaches who are going to have sympathy towards Matt Painter on this. Look, how about Iowa? And the big story wasn't that they beat Maryland. I think most people expected them to beat Maryland. It was how they beat Maryland. The 1-2 punch of Jordan Bohannon and Keegan Murray was unbelievable. Look at the numbers here. They scored more than half of their points. First of all, I mean, to score over 110 points in a game is crazy. But again, they each had 30. Bohannon's 10 threes, tied for the second most for a Big Ten player all time. Murray missed just twice all day, his third 30-point effort of the season. To me, Bohannon is the bigger story of these. Like Keegan Murray's been doing, hasn't necessarily been this, but he's been doing things like this all year. Bohannon was struggling mightily. So I had their game on Sunday against Minnesota, and I was talking to Billy Taylor, who was the acting coach for that day because Fran McCaffrey was out due to COVID. And he said, hey, we're going to move Bohannon over to the point because we feel like he's just out of sorts and we want to have the ball in his hands a little bit more because that's where he's been so good through the years. And he started off really well. He hit a couple threes and kind of thought, okay, well, this is going to be the difference. And then honestly, it was the same thing down the stretch. He just wasn't great. But it seems like that clicked for whatever reason last night. How different is it for him? I mean, you played both guard positions, so you kind of know what that's like. How different for him is it to have the ball in his hand?
I think it's huge. I think it gets, when you have as a scorer, when you have the ball in your hands, when you're initiating the offense, it gives you more of a confidence because you just have a feel for the ball. You have a rhythm for the game. You're involved. But I mean, overall, I think Jordan Bohannon has just done a lot better job of getting himself involved in the offense, moving without the basketball. So he'll bring the ball up, initiate the offense. They'll run their motion offense. He'll come off of screens. You know, so one of the things, after he broke the record, I just felt like he wasn't as engaged. Like, he wasn't as aggressive. He wasn't assertive. And so now, all of a sudden, you see him bringing the ball up. He'll give the ball up to a guard. You know, he'll move without the basketball, kind of similar to Steph Curry does, where he initiates the offense. He runs some of that motion offense, guys setting screens for him. So I really was impressed with Jordan Bohannon. But I really thought it started with the Minnesota game because he really showed that assertiveness, that aggressiveness, you know, being more engaged in the game. And then also on the defensive end, he had a great defensive second half against Minnesota. So I think you get rewarded in a sense because, you know, he's playing hard. He's showing that he's interested. And then in a game like Maryland, where, you know, Maryland's not quite as locked into the scouting report, you know, he can get some opportunities and get looks for threes.
He was 12 of his last 49 from three coming into this game, and then he goes 10 of 16. He was fabulous. It feels like Murray is back in a rhythm. Going into that Minnesota game, he also was not playing well. He had a 4-game stretch where he was shooting under 35%. And then these last two games, it's been the guy that we saw early in the year. What did you see from him last night?
Well, I think their coaching staff is using him in multiple ways. They're playing him at the 3, the 4, and sometimes the 5. So I think it kind of throws off defenses in a rhythm. I think a lot of times when he was struggling, you know, he was kind of coming off the same actions. He was coming off those flare screens. He was coming off pin downs. Now, all of a sudden, they're using him in different ways. They're starting to set ball screens for him a little bit more. They're posting him up more. I think just the versatility and the way that they're utilizing him, it kind of throws you off as a defender because you have to guard so many different types of actions.
He has shot over 65% now in these last two games after being under 35 the previous 4. 54 points in those two games as Iowa 2 30-point scores in a game for the first time since 1976. And again, 110 points. What does this do here for Iowa as they move forward?
Well, I think it just, I mean, from a tournament standpoint, you got to look big picture because this team is so dangerous because they can play small ball. And I think the key with playing small ball is you guys got to match up with your physicality. And I think they've proven they can do that. I love when they play the Murray brothers at the 4 and 5. And I think Rabracha has played a lot stronger and more physical. He's showing his presence, being able to guard some of the elite bigs. So I really like this Iowa team from March because they can create mismatch problems on both ends of the court. They switch up their defenses. They play a little bit of zone. They play a little bit man. They press you a little bit. I love their guards coming off the bench. So I think they're a dangerous team.
I don't think they get enough credit for it either, but they're much better on defense this year than they have been in recent years. They're still uber efficient offensively, maybe not quite at the level of last year, you know, Luka Garza, but defensively they bought in. I think it's pretty apparent they have length. They can disrupt people. They're pretty good there. Fox Sports' Mike DeCourcy with his brand new bracket out this morning. Purdue and Wisconsin, both 2 seeds. Illinois is a 4, 1 spot ahead of Michigan State. Ohio State is a 6 after falling at Rutgers. Iowa a 9, Indiana a 10. And then look there at the bottom, who's knocking at the door. Michigan now among the first 4 out after last night's win. They're creeping up Mike DeCourcy joins us now, as he's going to every Friday here in the month of February. Let's start at the top, Mike. You had Purdue as a 1 seed in your bracket on Tuesday, and then they lost last night. How important is the magnitude of the loss? Like, for a game like that, the fact that they didn't just lose but got completely annihilated, does that matter much? Does that factor in much for you, or is it simply you're plugging in quad ones, quad twos? Do you have any bad losses, and how does it all fit together?
When you're talking about a 1 seed, I think it does matter. I don't think that when you talk about teams that are deeper in the field and there are a lot of losses for those teams, then it matters quite as much, because you'll probably have some close, some one-sided. But when you're trying to compare yourself to the absolute best teams in the country, then losing by as much as they lost to the Wolverines is certainly going to have an impact. It's not that you couldn't overcome it by going out and winning all the rest of your games or something like that in a great conference like this, but it does have an impact, and it certainly did in my decision to move Purdue down a notch. If it had been a 1-point buzzer beater type, they might have been able to hold on.
You had Wisconsin as a 1 seed 10 days ago, and then they lost to Illinois, but then had a great win this week. I mean, going on the road and beating Michigan State on Tuesday. How close was Wisconsin to getting back up to that 1 line? Are they solidly a 2, or are they kind of straddling again?
I think they're pretty solidly a 2 right now. And certainly in the Big Ten, they have the opportunity to go ahead and do some more that would build them back up. If you look at their schedule, teams like Michigan, they certainly have plenty of opportunities to surpass some others, but they would obviously need some cooperation from an Arizona, which seems disinclined to give them any. Kansas, which has a very difficult schedule, likewise in the Big 12, but they have been able to build a pretty firm statement to this point. I don't think you're going to see Auburn and Gonzaga fall off the 1 line. I just can't imagine that Gonzaga is going to lose in the West Coast Conference with the way things are going. Auburn's schedule, although Auburn is terrific and they deserve the seed they've earned, they have a terrific schedule metrically. If you look at their quad wins and, of course, their power rankings and all of that, it's all in great shape. But the schedule's not very difficult. It's odd the way it worked out, but they don't have to go to LSU. They don't have to go to Kentucky. Their Big 12 challenge game wasn't the strongest. So they're probably not moving anywhere based on that.
Yeah. Again, 8 quad 1 wins for Wisconsin, tied for the most in the country. The metrics still don't love them, as we have discussed, but they have a really good resume. I continue to find Rutgers fascinating, speaking of good resumes. So now 4 quad 1 wins after beating Ohio State, a great come-from-behind victory that we saw here on the Big Ten Network on Wednesday night. They, of course, as we know, have a couple really bad losses from earlier this year. You do not have them in your first 4 out. Where are they right now? Like, how close is Rutgers to being in this discussion?
They're a very vexing team. I think they're the most complicated team in the whole selection process right now, because they are essentially 2 different teams. Actually, in some ways, they're 4 different teams. There's the one that began the year, and there's the one that's playing now. There's the one that plays at the RAC, and then there's the one that plays everywhere else. Yeah. And that makes them really complicated. And if you look at their accomplishments, they have the 4 quad 1 wins, but they're also 99th or somewhere in that ballpark in the net. They're certainly in the 90s. So it makes it really challenging to process them. I think if they continue to achieve, we've seen Providence raise in the net from the 40 range to the 20 to the 25 range, because they've done it by winning games. They've continued to win. And so their metrics improve as a result of that. I think that Rutgers has to continue to do that. When I look at their resume, not only do they have the 4 quad 1 wins, they have right now 7 losses against teams that are unlikely to make the tournament. They're not on my bracket, and they don't seem to be, other than maybe a conference upset here or there, they don't seem to be headed that direction. That's a lot to carry around. And to counterbalance that, I think you have to do some extraordinary things down the stretch. What helps them Dave, is that of their remaining games, I believe only one is not a quad one opportunity. So if they do significantly well down this stretch, then they can perhaps not only improve those power rankings, but just overwhelm the non-tournament losses as well.
Yeah, my bias, and this is long before I got to this network, my bias has just always been, who did you beat? I just feel like, did you beat teams that are in the field? And I can't help but to look at North Carolina. Hey, they finally have a quad one win, by the way, because Michigan moved up 17 spots last night with its win. And so North Carolina, Michigan's now 30. So bravo, North Carolina. You have one quad one win, and yet they are in your bracket. And they've gotten annihilated by some people. Now, I know they've gotten annihilated by good teams, and I guess that's the distinction that you're making here. But, like, I look at North Carolina, and who have you beaten? You've beaten nobody. And they're in everyone's bracket.
Yeah, it comes down to, though, that they did. It's also who'd you lose to an extent.
No, I get it. Yep.
And that's where Rutgers' resume completely falls apart. That batch of 7 non-tournament losses is just hard to ignore, and I think that contributes to the fact that they are as deep into the net rankings and KenPom, et cetera, as they are. You have to beat some good people, and they are doing that. Dave, if they were doing it on the road as well, I think it would do more to overcome those 7 negative results. If you beat Ohio State in Columbus, if you were able to beat Purdue in Mackey, what they're showing is that they are one of the extraordinary home teams in college basketball. That's not surprising to us. Those of us who cover the league closely, we know how difficult it is to play there. If they take that act on the road a few times, then all of a sudden people start to forget about the fact that you lost to somebody in November or December.
Well, as you say, they do have a lot of opportunities here down the stretch. So we'll see. They're in the midst of a really difficult stretch of schedule. I mentioned Michigan, now a quad one, that move up to 30 in the net with that win last night. Again, you had them in the first 4 out. I mentioned, Trey and I were just looking at their schedule. I mean, 7 of their last 8 games are quad one games. So what do they need to do here? And the one that isn't is against that Rutgers team at home. So what do they need to do here to move out of that first 4 out and find themselves in the bracket?
Well, I think that next stretch of games, Ohio State, at Iowa, at Wisconsin, I think, and then, of course, Rutgers after that, I think is a significant chance for them to move forward. They now have the momentum and the game tape that they can show themselves and say, look what we're capable of doing if we do things right. We just knocked one of the 5 or 6 best teams not in the league, but in the country, and just completely blew them out of the gym. So let's play like this, and we can play with anybody in this league. And so if they play something like what they did against Purdue, then all 4 of those teams that are coming up in the next 2 weeks have to feel imperiled. And I look at the Rutgers game. I think that's kind of an essential game for you because you're not necessarily in competition with Rutgers. You're in competition with everybody that's on the bubble. But if you get the opportunity to take out somebody that's in that group, then what a huge victory that is for you. You hurt your competition, you escalate yourself. So I think that's a huge game. And then if they could get another one of those next 3 games, the Ohio State, Iowa, or Wisconsin games, if they can get at least one of them, then they keep themselves steadily in the picture and maybe wait for others to fall. If you get 3 out of those 4, you're now a firm tournament team and you have to play yourself out. So I think that 4-game stretch really will define more than likely what Michigan becomes. They could mess it up and then still come down and do the next 4 games and do really well in the Big Ten tournament, and all of that would be set aside. But I tend to think that if they're going to be successful, that these 4 games coming off of Purdue will say a lot about whether they have the ability to put win after win after win. They're not going to get there going under 500 against what remains.
Yeah, again, 2 quad one wins at this point, but 7 of their last 8 quad one opportunities. Pretty remarkable. How damaging was that loss to Northwestern for Indiana? They were shorthanded, of course. They had 5 players suspended for the game, and then Rob Finney still hurt. They've got a really difficult schedule stretch coming up themselves. Well, where do you see the Hoosiers right now?
Yeah, I said on Sunday night on Beyond that I thought that game was as important as any game they would play, and that obviously was not knowing what would happen in advance of that game and that so many players would be suspended. So it was a devastating loss for them. Now they have to counter it by doing something they're not supposed to do, by beating someone in this stretch of really difficult games. You're looking at, after that, Michigan State, Wisconsin, and then at Maryland, then at Minnesota. So I think they have to beat either Michigan State or Wisconsin to feel good about where they stand. If they are able to do that, I think they're fine. And then, of course, you have to take care of business in those 2 games against Maryland and Minnesota. You obviously can't afford slips like the one against Northwestern. Look, Northwestern at home is a quad 1 game. And we know that Northwestern is capable of playing with anyone in this league. We've seen them a point or 2 away from beating Illinois. We saw them take out Michigan State. So we know that that's not a loss to a bad team, and certainly not in that gym. But it was a damaging loss because of what's up ahead of them. And now, look, Indiana's not in danger of falling out because of that. But if you start to do other things that are not in keeping with a tournament type team, like losing to Maryland, like losing to Minnesota, we've seen those teams beat really good opponents as well. So Indiana has to get itself back together in terms of its roster, everybody on board and everybody pulling in the same direction. It'd be really helpful for them to take out one of these next 2 opponents.
I want to ask you real quickly about Iowa as well. They have just 1 quad 1 win at this point. It's nothing to write home about. It's a neutral court win over Utah State. You watched them last night. It's impossible not to think that. I mean, you want to talk about passing the eye test. I'd say they passed it in resounding fashion last night. But do they need a couple more wins here that they can kind of point to and say, see, we beat really good teams?
I think if they do what they've done, then they're going to be in, and they'll probably be in an 8-9 game, and then it'll be up to them to do something with it. They are like the perfect 8-9 team because they don't defend great. Their metrics there are not great. They play offense really well, so they have that on their to their advantage. They're 20th in the net today. The NCAA is not passing on the 20th net team, and with the way they play offense, that's not moving much unless they were to go on an unexpected losing streak and to start taking L's against teams that they should beat. Well, they showed last night they're not really in the mood to take L's against teams they should beat. Maryland has very good players. We all know that. We've seen them win games in the past, and they went there and just completely dominated. So it would be nice for Iowa to win some of the tougher games in this league. They haven't done it much, obviously, but if they did, they can maybe dig themselves out of that 8-9 game. It's a good place to be because you know you're getting in, but if you can climb above it, then all of a sudden you don't have to face a 1 seed in your second game.
Still have Michigan and Michigan State at home, so opportunities to get wins in Iowa City against high-profile teams. Mike, this is fun. We'll look forward to doing it again next week.
Thanks, Dave.
Joins us now. I want to get into the Big Ten action.
Right.
But first, we've been talking a lot about the Olympics and the Big Ten players who were lost both to the U.S. team and to the Canadian team. Right. Update us on how everyone's doing.
Yeah, I mean, the big talk was, how is it going to be for these young guys coming in? Because they're all 18, 19, 20-year-old guys, and they had a pretty good, successful first game. Only one so far, but all the American guys hit the score sheet. Ben Myers there obviously had the best night with a goal and 2 assists, the Golden Gopher, but everyone kind of got in there. And then you see at the bottom, Kent Johnson plays for Michigan. He was an alternate. Like, he wasn't even on the roster, but then COVID hit some guys, which I think that's why they did it.
Yeah.
He gets in the game and he gets 2 assists in like the first period. And I'm thinking, and I thought this before, I'm like, why is he not on this team immediately? He's one of the most skilled players. He's going to be in the NHL as soon as he decides to leave college. So he gets in, he does that, and then Owen Power, the defenseman for Canada, led all players in ice time. So really good start, and now tonight they play each other
Yeah, USA
So the
Canada.
Michigan guys will be going against each other. That's always weird, I think, as players, because you're going to go against each other, and then in a couple of weeks you're going to be back fighting for the same thing again.
That's great.
And it happens all the time at the NHL
Yeah,
players when they go to the Olympics, but it's still just a fun kind of weird.
It's just amazing at that age, right, to have that kind of experience. How much value do you think that this will bring for these guys in terms of when they do come back? Elevating their game.
I mean, I think it can't hurt, right? And especially success already. If they were playing against the cream of the crop, the NHL guys, and they had success, I'm sure that would probably give them even more confidence, knowing that, I can fit in at the next level. But whatever kind of success they have going through this, I think it's just going to make them, and they're already really confident, top echelon college players. It's only going to boost them even more.
Let's get into these games you're calling this weekend. Minnesota, Ohio State is the biggest series. It's here on the Big Ten Network, as we said. They met earlier this year, and they split.
Right, yes.
But back in November.
Right.
But, man, Minnesota's so different, right? Because you've got all these guys in the Olympics, and then Jack LaFontaine, the goalie's in the NHL now. So what does that mean in terms of affecting the Gophers and their ability to compete with Ohio State?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is their depth is hit. Obviously, you're losing your top 3 players, and then your goaltender. That's a big thing. I think Justin Close has done a good job coming into net for them, but he hasn't seen 30 shots in a game yet, which is something there's a good chance at least one of these tonight or tomorrow he's going to see a opponent offense coming at him. So let's see how he does with that. Just doesn't know. And Ohio State's a much different team since that November meeting. All their guys have grown. Their transfer guys have, and then these freshmen have been unbelievable.
Right.
They haven't lost a game in regulation in 15 games since December 9th or 10th against Michigan.
And only one loss total, right?
Yeah, they had
15 games.
An overtime loss to Notre Dame, a shootout loss, which, you're getting the shootouts. That's a whole different story.
Right.
And even the overtimes are 3-on-3. So you're not playing the regular 5-on-5 game. And they haven't lost since December. That's 15 game stretch. So this is going to be arguably their toughest test. I'd love to see it if it was Minnesota at their peak, with all their players. But, hey, it is what it is. Minnesota's pretty deep. I mean, the third star of the Big Ten last week was a defenseman, Carl Fish, who hadn't been playing a ton, but he got moved up into a higher role, and he had 3 assists and was a big star in the league. So it just shows the depth.
As Ohio State tries to close this out and win the regular season, how challenging are these next 2 weeks? Because then they play Michigan after that.
They do. And, they do get a little bit of a break, obviously, that Michigan is going to be missing, some guys. But the thing for them is challenging as you see the standings, but the big thing is they will not be playing that last regular season weekend. There's 7 teams in the league, so everyone has a bye week, and theirs comes in the last week. So they need to take care of business the next 2 weeks. If they can do that, maybe then they don't have to worry that last week if they can stay at the top of the standings and put a little gap there. But they're going to have a tough time because they're playing the 2 teams that are fighting for that same spot.
And then we see the Gophers, they're 5 points behind. So how important is this weekend for them to kind of stay within spitting distance?
Yeah, I think you got to split, I think, if you're Minnesota, at the least. Obviously, you're going for everyone wants to win every game. But I think both teams are looking to get at least 1 win. You don't want to get swept, I think, at this point in the season. It's a different thing with hockey, right? You're always playing back-to-back games against. It's really hard to sweep because if you beat a team Friday, that next night, you're going to get that other team's desperation best.
Notre Dame and Wisconsin this weekend. They were supposed to play last night and tonight.
Right, it was supposed to be on the network last night.
Right, they
another COVID casualty.
They moved it back to Saturday and Sunday because of COVID in the Badgers program.
Yeah.
Does that help either of these teams? I mean, obviously it helps Wisconsin; they'll be healthy. But I'm just saying, like the fact that it was delayed. Is that better for either team? Or
what's funny is I thought it was going to be maybe rough for Notre Dame, having a Thursday, Friday, a shorter week, coming on the road. And now I'm thinking, is it the same thing? Because now it's Saturday, Sunday, it's Super Bowl night, that late Sunday night game. I don't know what kind of crowd, honestly, Wisconsin will get that Sunday night because tickets had to be moved. People have season tickets. They're like, and then people have Super Bowl plans.
Yeah.
It's just, there's nothing going on usually in the sports world, but they had to do this. You got to get the games in, and they're doing the best they could. They had to move around basketball games, I believe, women's and men's at Wisconsin to kind of get the schedule right. So, Notre Dame, this is big for them, is because they're fighting still in the Big Ten and, for the national rings to get in the NCAA tournament. So, it's going to be weird. They're going to have to, both teams are going to have to maybe bring up their own energy in a game like Sunday night when, the crowd might be sparse. So, yeah, it's going to be tough.
You mentioned the NCAA tournament. Give us a sense of where things stand right now with the Big Ten.
It looks like at the minimum, there's a 16-team tournament. So, you're slicing it down from 64 to 16. You start with a Sweet 16, but it looks like there's 4 teams. It's really tight. Michigan obviously is number 1. So they could probably lose all their games and they're not going to have any problems. But with those other 3 teams, the biggest thing they can't do is get swept, not win a game in a weekend. And then this weekend, we just talked about with Notre Dame, when they're playing a team that's lower in the rankings, this is all computerized, right?
Yes.
So when you're playing a team that's 38 or 40 and you lose a game in regulation, that really hurts you. So I think that'll help concentration levels for Notre Dame. Not to mention that the fact that they're trying to get up in the Big Ten standings. But that's the big thing, is a loss to a low-level team really hurts you.
And then, of course, you have the Big Ten tournament as well. The Big Ten tournament is different this year, right? So
it went back to the old way, kind of.
Yeah, where you're not bringing everyone together in one location. It's over 3 weekends.
Right, yes.
And on a home ice.
On home ice, the number 1 seed gets a bye through the quarterfinals, and the other 3 brackets will play a best-of-3 series the first weekend. Yeah. Then the next weekend is a semifinal, and it's all on home ice. So whoever is the top seed left at the end will get the championship game at home on the final day. But, that will be the first weekend's the interesting one, because if you looked at the standings, the top 4 and the bottom 3 have really separated.
Right.
So, whoever gets the bye, but those other 3 teams that play that bottom 3, if they lose a series to one of those bottom 3, that would really hurt the NCAA actions, because you saw the pairwise.
Yeah.
They're around 9, 10, 11. To be ultra safe, you got to be 12. All Gopher fans out there know what I'm talking about, because one year it just happened. They were 13th, and 3 other teams not won their conferences were upsets. Yeah. So that knocked out number 13, 14, and 15 for at-large bids. Ooh. And Minnesota was the first team knocked out.
It's going to be that's fascinating. I love it being on home ice, right?
And you earn it.
You value the regular season and all those things.
Absolutely.
But as you say, there's always problem with conference tournaments.
It is.
There's the potential for upsets when you're on the margins there.
Absolutely.
Have great calls.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
And appreciate